front Dana 30 on the Jeep Grand Cherokee. And I guess the first thing is you want to disassemble the old assembly. And so try and save your bearings if you can, but remove your bearings and keep track of your shims. There should be some shims in behind each bearing on the carrier. So remove the bearings, keep track of the shims, remove the bearings on the pinion and keep track of the shims there. There may be, you might have to remove the race inside the housing there. There may be some shims in beside the cup on that's installed in the housing. Keep track of all of that, and then once you've removed your bearings, you kept track of your shims, then get your old bearings, and if you were able to save them, I wasn't able to save the carrier bearings, so I had to buy a new set and grind out the inside bore on all of the bearings so that you can slip them on and off by hand. Use a stone, not a carbide tip there, just like sharpening a chisel. You grind down the hardened steel with a stone. Once you've got your bearings, they're all slip fit and ready. Then what I also did too was, because I'm changing the ring and the pinion, this is a brand new set. My new pinion, the yoke was tight, so that wouldn't go on there. Had to be press fit on. So what I did was I put some lapping compound on here, and I worked it up and down in the press. I'd press it on, press it off, and I just kept doing that until I got it to the point where I can install it and remove it by hand. That's my preference. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. I like all my parts to go on and off by hand, just for ease of installation, disassembly. Also, the old nut, I take the old nut, and if you have a die or a tap, you can tap the threads in here and make sure that it'll go on and off by hand as well. I don't have the tap for that size, so again I use a lapping compound, and I spun this up and down with the impact, so that'll come on and off by hand. And all of this is in preparation for the assembly and disassembly of the pinion, when you're trying to determine what you need for your shims, because you'll be adjusting those for your contact pattern. So then next is get yourself a good installation kit. This is the one that I've got, and it'll have everything you need in there. It'll have your bolts, your bearings, your seals, your crush sleeve, your shims, your sealant, your compound, and then I also have this reference book here. This one was with I got this with the ring and pinion. I did not get that with the rebuild kit. So if you don't have this information for your application, then maybe go online and see if you can get that information, and it'll give you your OEM shim depth, your preload for your bearings, your backlash, and some torque specifications. In our case, we're doing the Dana 30, so we've got 65 thou shim depth OEM. We've got our new bearings at 12 to 15 inch-pounds preload. We've got our backlash at 10 to 15. And then we have, for here is the different size bolts. We'll go down to the bottom. If they're 3/8, they're 55 foot-pounds. If they're 7/16, they're 75 foot-pounds. And those are for the ring bolt and the cap. Those are your torque specifications there. So now that we've got everything ready to go for the assembly, I would start off with those original shims. I put them original shims back on, and then with our dummy bearings. So reassemble shims, dummy bearings on the carrier, and reassemble your original shim pack for the pinion if you had them. In my case, all they had was this thick oil slinger, and this is acting as the shim. I didn't bother with the number on the end of the pinion. That just caused me a bunch of grief. I suggest you put it all back together with the original shims, and then you put your compound on there, you get a pattern on your teeth, and you start from there, and then you do your adjustments. That number on the end of the pinion just caused me a bunch of grief. The back of this book here, it also helps us out with a guide, and it's telling us that if the contact pattern is in the bottom corner there of the drive tooth, then our pinion is too close, and if it's at the top, then the pinion is too far away. This is the drive side of the gear, so it's kind of curved outwards here, and so you check that, and that tell you whether or not you have to shim this thing in or out and make your adjustments. Your shims, in my case, was just this plate here. So you may have shims that go in underneath this bearing, in between the bearing and the pinion head, or you'll have shims that go in behind the cone. So one or the other, or both, possibly. In this particular example, that got me very close, and rather than putting a shim along with this oil slinger ring, I put the remaining shim in behind the cup here, which was 5.5, and that got me to where I like the contact pattern. So you are removing this, you're getting your contact pattern, you're figuring out what you need to do for shims, and then you got to remove this, and then you're going to have to adjust your shims and then reassemble it. So that is why we have the dummy bearings, is because we're going to be adjusting our shims, so we want to slip those bearings off by hand and reassemble everything and put it in. That is also why I like to have this coming off by hand. And another thing is, I personally don't put the crush sleeve back in when I'm doing this assembly and disassembly all the time. I will just put in, I'll put the bearing back in here, and then I use my yoke and the nut, and I just snug it down all by hand, and you'll be able to tell, right? If you overdo it, it'll turn a little tight, and you'll be able to tell. But you just need to tighten it up by hand, because you're taking it apart, putting it back together. You just don't want any wiggling here. You want to make sure this is just sturdy and turns freely while you're making those adjustments. Once you've got your contact pattern where you like it, and your pinion is done, then next we're going to move on to our backlash, which is going to be where the teeth, you're rocking this back and forth, and that clearance is going to be your backlash, and that is where these shims come in on either side. And what happens there is you're going to be adjusting these shims to either tighten or loosen up that backlash. And I guess in our case, the backlash was 10 to 15 thou. So let's say that you're too tight. That means that your ring gear is too far into the pinion. So what you want to do is you want to remove some shims from this bearing here, and you're going to take that shim and you're going to put it over on this side. So if you take 10 thou off of one side, you're adding it to the other, because you want to maintain that distance for the assembly of the carrier going in. So you remove shims from one end, and then you add that same amount to the other end to maintain that distance there. Once you've achieved your backlash, then we're ready to assemble our new bearings. And so new bearings, we want to put this in the press, and you're gonna need to get yourself some jigs or whatever to make that happen. And so I just got a piece of pipe here, and it just contacts the inside race of the bearing. Seat that down, and then on the carrier here, sometimes what happens is the bearing is actually lower than the carrier. So when you're adjusting those shims, it could actually end up becoming just a little bit lower than the face of the carrier here. So you might need to get yourself something that has like a step in it. And you put that on there, and that's going to contact the inside race of the bearing, but not the carrier, and seat that down all the way. Seat both of your carrier bearings down with your shims. And now once we've got to where we're at right now here, and then we want to be able to install our pinion. So we're going to have our pinion. We've already got our shim and our cup installed into the housing on the Jeep. Then we have our crush sleeve. This is, you put the new one in there. We'll have our bearing. The bearing won't slide on here, so it'll be about there. It'll stay there because it's going to be tight. And then if your kit has it, or if it was with the original assembly, so there's this baffle, this oil slinger for this bearing on the end here. And then your yoke. I choose to put the yoke on, and you could at this moment install your oil seal if you like. I like to do that last, just in case this has to come apart again. That's another reason I would like to have this come on and off by hand, because once we do this final assembly, we'll take this off to install that oil seal. So then we put on our washer here, our new lock nut, and once, like, all of this now is going to be tight. So if we didn't make this slip on by hand, this is an interference fit. Our lock nut is going to be tight because it's a lock nut, and our bearing is going to be tight driving onto the new pinion. And then we've got our new crush sleeve, which is going to be tight because you're going to be compressing it to get your preload between the two bearings. So we need to hold our yoke while we're tightening down our nut, and there's no flats on this style of yoke, so I can't hold it with the pipe wrench. Also, the diameter is too large, and I can't grab it here because it's tapered. So what I've done is I just made this bar here, and I drilled some holes in it, and I've got it so you can get those two holes line up, or those two holes there, and then you can still see that our socket is below, and we could probably get an extension in beside the bar there. So this bar is going to hold the yoke while we're tightening this down, and we're going to continue to tighten this down until we get our preload. And the preload is on the list here. The new pinion preload on here is 12 to 15 inch-pounds. So we have our inch-pound torque wrench. So you'll tighten it down, and then you'll put your inch-pound torque wrench on there, and you'll check it, and you'll just keep doing that and adjusting it until you get it within the spec there. Now I'll leave this until the absolute end, and then I will remove this, and then I'll put on my oil seal. But now we've got the pinion installed. Now we go back to the carrier. We're going to install our carrier. This should go in tight because of our shims there cause the preload on these two bearings, which could in theory be a 5 thou interference fit. And then so we're going to pound this in with a rubber hammer, and then we're going to put on our bearing caps. We're going to tighten that down. The spec on the sheet for the bearing cap bolts was 50 foot-pounds, and so we're tightening this down. And now I got to go back. I want to check my backlash is still good, and I want to check my contact and make sure my contact on the teeth is still good. Now that I'm happy with all of that, that's when I remove the yoke, and then I'll put in that oil seal.